focusing cannon strike, his body transforming into conscious particles that swarmed Period. It all happened in an instant. Period didn't move, and not because she couldn't. "What? That's crazy," said Carillion. She didn't need to move. Her breath had turned into a poison mist that clung to the particles Carillion controlled. It took away all his kinetic energy, effectively blocking him from action. But Frey had predicted Carillion's initial defeat. She flew off, using his attack as a feint, and landed behind Period. Now it was her turn to fire off her most powerful strike. "Time to bind you where you are," she announced, just after using Garuda Claw to grab her. Frey's magic interference had become effective enough that it reached the ultimate, divine realm. It was so strong it could even seal off a Dalman's Necronomicon, and combined with the Garuda Claw she was relying on, she could shut down the abilities of any opponent, no matter who they were. Or normally she could. But even though she should have felt endangered, Period just smiled. "It's sad," she said. "My children, being defeated by opponents of this caliber." "What?" Before Frey got an answer, she took a massive blow to her abdomen, silencing her. "NGH. KRHH?" She still had a startled expression on her face as she spat out blood. Following her instincts, she removed her hand from Period. That saved her life. If she trusted Garuda Claw enough to keep it going, the next strike from Period would have killed her. "You have good instincts," Period said. "Your claws kept me from leveraging my power a little, but I could have finished you off with 2 blows instead. But now I'm convinced of it. You may not have strength, but you do have extensive combat experience. Perhaps my children deserve to have their honor restored a little." Period's voice sounded like a song. "I can't believe it," Frey managed. "Nullifying my claws, just like that. You really are an unbelievable monster, aren't you?" Frey was sure of it now. This site was soon to become a slaughterhouse, just as it would be for Gobta and Ranga, and for Carillion, sprawled out on the ground. He was too exhausted to even speak, much less try to defend himself. The only choice remaining was to run away. "Ugh. Not to quote Frey, but I never thought she'd be this much of a monster," thought Carillion. He regretted not being able to recognize as much at the start of their fight. "Not that it would have mattered even if I did." Carillion chuckled at himself. Looking back, Period deflecting Carrera's abyss annihilation probably should have raised some warning flags for him. Assuming she was a mid to long-range fighter was a mistake everybody on Milim's side had made. But did Milim not notice it, either? I sincerely doubt that. So why didn't she do anything? Oh. Could the insect Lord Xeranus be that much worse of an opponent? A chill ran down Carillion's back. He recalled his own battle with Milim. Why would she, an absolute presence wherever she went, not be moved by this danger? The reason obviously had to do with the insect lord. And that meant they couldn't expect any help from Milim here. That's it, damn it. So this whole battle. Finishing that sentence in his mind would be nothing but an affront to his friends. Carillion, realizing this, shifted gears, trying to think about what else he might be able to do. Frey was badly hurt, although not as much as Carillion. She and Period exchanged glances. Frey was prepared to die. As long as Period was the clear champion among them, no one would be able to stop her. It made sense, then, that Period would start by killing Frey, the weakest. Frey knew she'd do the same thing in her shoes. "I'm sorry, Carillion," Frey thought. "I wanted to know so much more about you, but I guess this is it." With that resolve in mind, she prepared to lodge one final attack. But then a man stood in front of her. It was Midray, facing Period as if to protect Frey. "Ho! So this is how things stand?" he remarked. "The purpose of the barrier you set up in this battlefield was to gather up the energy of your dead comrades and send it to you, wasn't it?" "Not gather, no." Period smiled as she turned her gaze toward Midray. "I want more power, you see, so I can give birth to even tougher children." That was enough of an answer for Midray. Clearly, he saw Period had to be defeated before she could do anything else. If we let her escape from here, she'll just create more and more monsters like those insect masters we just defeated, he thought. A shame it's our side that wants to flee more than she does. He grinned a bit. But there was still hope left in his eyes. In that case, he announced as he held his chest down in a fighting stance, try and defeat me first. Shifting his weight to his right leg, he lightly moved his left forward. At the same time, he clenched his right hand and drew it toward his waist, his left hand in front of him to check Period's movements. The next moment, he exploded with power from the toes of his left foot up, surging his body forward like a cannonball. Then, thrusting his fist with all his might, he formed a mass of fighting spirit in the air, also shaped like a fist. Dragonic Cannon. Uniting the planet's energy with his own fighting spirit, he focused everything he had in every part of his body straight into the fist. Then he let it all out, not sparing even a drop of strength as he combined it with the force buried in the soil. It was a divinity-tinged blow, one powerful enough to work against superior opponents. This was the secret move of Midray, a high-level chaos elemental better known as a Dragonborn. Unfortunately, it didn't work on Period. "What a fascinating strike," she said. "I'm sure it'd make my children stronger if they learned it." She smiled as she deployed a space-altering magic circle with ease to banish the Dragonic Cannon. But this, too, was what Midray predicted. He didn't actually think this would be the end at all, that cannon was just a decoy. The real attacker, of course, was Gobta. "Hey, don't forget about me," he yelled. "Try this on for size." Jumping out from behind Midray's shadow, Gobta chose just the right moment to launch his apocalypse howling. But that, too, didn't work. The unfazed Period just deployed another magic circle at the same time to cancel it out. It was a completely successful surprise attack, but none of it reached Period. But even so, there was still a glimmer of hope on both Midray's and Gobta's faces. There was another person ready to give her own best shot, and who could it be but Obila? "Don't get too proud of yourself, Bug," she cried. While Period's attention was drawn toward Midray and Gobta, Obila had been preparing an attack of her own. It proved to be the second planetary bombing of the day. Unlike Midray, Carillion, and the others, Obila boasted an EP that was actually on par with Period's. Thanks to that, not even this insect queen could emerge unscathed, unless she did. "Zorario was a wise man," Period said. "I had thought that you, as his colleague, would be as well." "What? Oh, no way. She's that good?" Period was still in supreme control. But there was no time to wail in despair. "Now for some payback," she said with a light smile. And the meteor shower appearing above revealed her intentions. Period had diverted the power of the three finishers thrown her way and now was dispersing it across the battlefield. It was a truly demonic piece of work, this furious attack, and it was bound to take the lives of many friends and foes alike. NNGH. Midray stared up at the sky, agitated. "Brace for impact, everyone." Gobta, for his part, used thought communication to warn his companions. Obila, meanwhile, was calmly flailing away at Period all by herself. If magic and beam-type attacks didn't work on her, Obila would need to finish her off with melee combat instead. This, at last, made Period wince. In fact, there was no large difference between her and Obila's overall combat ability. Period's dominate space skill gave her an insurmountable advantage against medium and long-range foes, but she wasn't that good up close, as shown by her inability to finish off Esprit and Phobio. Her plan was to first establish mental dominance over Obila, then overwhelm her, but seeing her attack fail didn't seem to disturb Obila at all. Obila, too, was a fierce warrior with ages of experience fighting the cryptids. She had dealt with all kinds of troublesome opponents with all kinds of unique characteristics, and nothing could faze her in battle. That was a miscalculation, yes, but Period still had the absolute advantage. Death was raining down across the battlefield, and the subsequent energy released would all belong to her. But it's strange, isn't it? Period thought. I was able to recover the energy of my children, but apart from that. Period looked around, trying to solve the riddle. Then she realized her second miscalculation. The enemy force, Milim and her army, was being protected by Geld and his troops. Don't give up. As long as we're here, nobody will have to die. Geld's strong, dependable voice stormed across the landscape. Yeah. The forces he led pushed themselves forward, hoping to meet the expectations of their leader. Even if their shields were shattered and their armor lost, they'd use their strength to its fullest to protect everyone else from the meteors raining down on them. And that wasn't all. The demons serving Carrera were also swooping onto the scene. Recovery magic flew across the battleground, offering healing to any wounded soldier. And, hey, you still got a lot of work to do. With that light chiding from a member of the Diable Chevalier came the invocation of resurrection, a divine miracle. The demons' firm faith in Raimuru now allowed them to even raise the dead. Even if their bodies had been torn apart, the demons could recover their souls and resurrect them at a later date. There was a time limit to this, but it still meant bringing the wholly dead back to life, which kept morale high across Milim's force. Everyone on hand was tackling this crisis head-on, doing everything they could to complete their mission. Period, realizing this, finally began to feel distressed. The dead are coming back to life? I had no idea such a skill existed in this world. Obila shrugged at Period's surprise. Yeah, I thought it was marked as taboo, but now it's spread well beyond the point of no return. Obila herself had been stunned when she heard of this. She was first informed of it at a strategy meeting, and it made her look at the ceiling and say, no way. But it was too late. If the technique had spread this far, it was best to make the most effective possible use of it. Besides, if it reduced battlefield losses to nearly zero, maybe she simply ought to accept it. Obila expected this to happen to some extent. She didn't think her own attacks would be repelled like that, but the only casualties so far in this battle were all on the bug's side. Having all their energy revert to Period was a pain, but now that Period was effectively the only enemy left, suddenly things didn't seem that awful anymore. All right, Obila said. I hope you're ready for this. From now on, it's going to be a very one-sided hunt. Hunting down and killing her prey was something of a specialty for Obila. She had been commander during many group battles against foes more powerful than her, and now she was even letting a composed smile cross her face. May I ask for your orders, Master Strategist? Said Midray. He, too, was relieved to see little permanent damage among his allies. He didn't expect destruction on that scale, but thanks to the efforts of Geld and his forces, they had escaped disaster, an unexpected bit of good news. No longer worried about his future, he was happy to go back under Obila's command. Yeah, bring him on. Gobta was on board, too. Against someone as powerful as Period, teamwork was the only path to victory. But since they hadn't trained together before and probably couldn't work as a team straight away, he decided to join Obila instead. It was Obila, Midray, and Gobta Ranga against Period, but then another would-be challenger chimed in. My mother, grant me the honor of crushing your enemies. Mujika, abandoned by Geld, had dug his way up from the ground to jump out. It was 3 against 2, and even that didn't last long. Hey, don't forget about me, either. And me. I don't want people to think that was the end of me. Carillion and Frey rushed on the scene, freshly healed by Geld but still covered in scars. Their external wounds were all fixed up, but there was no getting back the energy lost so far. They were too out of gas to break out any truly devastating strikes, but they steeled themselves and joined in anyway, reasoning it was better to fight than not fight. I'm here, too, Geld said, visibly excited and exhaling a mighty gust of air to accentuate his point. That made it 6 on 2. Gobwa and the 3 lycanthropeers were still active as well, dealing with what remained of the insect force. None of them could do anything against Period, though, so it was fair to assume these gathered forces were all they had, but even this team-up elicited nothing but an eerie smile from Period. "What wonderful core bodies you all have," she said. "I'd love to use you to birth even more tenacious children than before." She was brimming with confidence as Obila and the others eyed her. And she had good reason to. Reconstruct life. Period was able to use the energy she accumulated to strengthen the children of her own creation. That only applied to those who were still alive, of course, but Zeth and Mujika were still present and in good health. So with two super warriors as her wingmen, the queen and wife of Xeranus the insect lord finally revealed her true colors. Carrera, realizing the situation after Zeth's prompting, gritted her teeth. She had been enjoying her little confrontation so far, but after her parade got rained on like this, she lost all interest. Then she felt a chill. She instinctively leapt back, and a moment later, the place where she was exploded. Excellent, said Zeth. Thanks to you, I am one step closer to becoming a new creator. I want to test this power, and I'll need your help. Also speaking more naturally than before, he opened and closed his fists as he addressed Carrera. It was the strong speaking down to the weak, an attitude that trampled all over Carrera's pride. "Aha. Funny to hear that from you," she said. "You want me to be your sparring partner for that? You do not have the right to refuse." As soon as he said it, Zeth lightly flicked out his fist. It was a gentle jab, lodged at several dozen times the speed of sound. The shock wave was strong enough to burn the air and shatter the ground. Clearly, he was more powerful than before. Zeth's EP hadn't doubled, but it had likely seen a major upgrade. More troubling was the fact that he had likely gained an array of new special skills. "What a cowardly move," Carrera grumbled. She had constructed a path to victory for herself, and now it was back to the drawing board. But as difficult as it had become, she didn't think it was impossible. Zeth might have more power, but it didn't seem like he had gained any new battle expertise. If Zeth had shown off a mastery on the level of Zegan, Carrera would have felt mortally endangered, but there was no feeling like that. Despite her qualms, she hadn't lost her cool yet. That being said, Zeth had just publicly dissed her, and she couldn't wait to pay him back for that. So Carrera's smile hadn't faded from her face because she had fallen into despair at the sight of Zeth's power. No, the problem was more with his friends. "That one over there looks like bad news," Carrera thought. "She looks stronger than my prey here. Tag team or not, I wonder if Obila and Midray can beat her." By Carrera's estimation, it would take the combined efforts of Gobturanga, Geld, Carillion, and Frey just to maybe defeat Mujika. That was how formidable he had become as well. Even if that did come to pass, it was still a coin flip. "And any self-sacrifice is against the will of my master." Carrera remained faithful to Raimuru's orders. She was engaging Zeth like this because if she took on the toughest enemy, that would prevent casualties among any of her allies. That, of course, was based on the premise that Millen would do something about Xeranus, the enemy's leader, but if Carrera took on their number 2 fighter, she figured the rest would work itself out. Now that this assumption was proven to be wrong, she didn't want to be stuck with Zeth, who had become number 3 in the pecking order. It was time for her to make a momentous decision. "I wanted to save this in case something came up, but I don't want to regret keeping it under wraps. Sorry, Zeth. I would have enjoyed fighting with you more, but it looks like this is going to be goodbye." She turned toward Zeth, apologizing internally. She had wanted to defeat him with her core strength for the sake of gaining experience, but if her friends' lives were at stake, she couldn't put her own fun first. So, her mind made up, she pointed her golden gun at him. "Hair. Don't you understand yet that it doesn't work on me?" As Zeth said this, the magic bullets condensed by Carrera's gun were only powerful enough to damage Zeth's exoskeleton, damage from which he immediately healed and regenerated, so it essentially did nothing. She continued to use her gun as a distraction, however, as well as one other, more important, reason. "All right," she said. "Die, then." It was also her trump card when push came to shove. Before Carrera's words reached Zeth, a bullet shot out from the golden gun, a judgment bullet, capable of felling anything that existed. "Huh?" Zeth froze as he looked at the hole in his chest. Then, a beat later, came the sensation of his life fading from him. The magic ore that maintained his existence was destroyed, and he understood there was no escaping the death advancing upon him. You were going easy from the start. No. We were about equal in actual strength, and you're a pretty impressive sight now. If we went all out against each other, it would have been tough to beat you. So, why? Why else? Fighting a battle she couldn't predict the outcome of was fun to Carrera, but her personal concerns could no longer take first priority. The more Carrera struggled against Zeth, the greater the chance her friends would be wiped out, but there was another, more personal reason. The fight has been interesting enough for me, but you're weaker than Zijan, so, I think I'm good now. With a big, innocent smile, Carrera told Zeth the truth, a truth that plunged him into despair. It was a very demonic thing to do, but that sort of thing came naturally to her. I was inferior? I was destined to become a new creator. His voice sounded full of regret as he spoke his last words. Even seeing the end of such a powerful enemy like this, Carrera didn't feel she had accomplished much. Without even a moment spent basking in her achievement, she was about to head over to help Gobta and his cohorts, but then a hidden enemy made his move. Heh. I was waiting for this moment. What? She had detected no one else near her, but Carrera was startled by the sudden pain that ran through her arms, not actual pain, but data impulses reporting to her brain about the damage. An unbelievably heavy, violent shock had smashed itself against her, striking the arms she had put up to defend her vital points. It was the work of the insect lord Xeranus, who evaded even Carrera's universal detect before making his appearance. Carrera's instincts reacted quickly enough, but if it were anyone else, that one blow would have ended it. About time you showed up, she said. Why the hurry? If you are within attack range, I will not hesitate to crush you. Just as he said, Xeranus was looking for any and every opportunity to hit Carrera. He far outclassed her in skill, something he was rightly proud of, but still he laid low and waited for the perfect opportunity, fearing what may happen otherwise. It was Carrera's judgment bullets that scared him. Minaza, sent out as part of the vanguard force, had once sent a report warning him about a man named Kondo. She didn't go into great detail about all his abilities, but based on her observations, Kondo had an unknown but extremely dangerous skill, a description Xeranus took seriously. He later inquired with Michael and Feldway about it, and when he did, he learned that Kondo's skill had been transferred to Carrera. Thanks to this research, Xeranus had come at least somewhat prepared for what was to come. Michael's castle guards seemed to block the attack, but Xeranus had nothing like that. He had concerns about his own personal security, so he wanted to wait for Carrera to break out that fearsome skill on someone else before he had to deal with it. Call it caution, call it cowardice, but it was one factor that made Xeranus the strongest of his kind. Now that the moment had arrived, all his concerns were gone. They had lost Zeth, a truly valuable pawn, but it was clear he'd had good reason to be so vigilant. Enemy or not, it was a truly wonderful weapon, Xeranus thought. If it were used on me, I'm not sure I would have survived it. Despite that praise, Xeranus's concerns about Carrera were already in the past. He had covered all the bases, and with that, the demon didn't seem dangerous in the slightest. Carrera, too, understood the danger as she looked Xeranus in the eye. This is a dangerous foe, great. I can't even see how far down his power goes. It felt like she was facing Zijan or someone worse. Xeranus had no openings to exploit. She had no clue how to begin tackling him. She hated to admit it, but she had to. She might have been the Menace Lord, but the Insect Lord had her outclassed. But not even that was going to make Carrera give up so easily. Huh? Pretty petty move for a so-called king, isn't it? She asked. Even now, she wasn't afraid to rile him. But Xeranus had her beat there. Trying to act strong at this point? You demons are all incredibly sore losers, aren't you? He looked down on Carrera, calm and composed, the attitude of a winner. "Oh, you think you've already won this? Isn't that a little too arrogant around the likes of me?" She was quick to retort, but the breezy, relaxed look on her face was gone. A single kick from Xeranas had crushed both her arms. She could barely ready her golden gun, much less hold her sword. Her skeleton was originally crafted by Rimuru from orichalc, which had subsequently evolved into crimson steel. It boasted god-class strength, toughness, and resistance, making it unbreakable. Maybe it would have been understandable if a god-class weapon had damaged it, but a mere kick. It was beyond unexpected. That alone showed just the kind of threat the insect lord posed. The secret behind it was made clear by looking at Xeranas's body. His exoskeleton shone in a dazzling array of colors, the sheen of crimson steel. So his whole body is crimson steel? It was clear from looking at the insect lord that he was a kind of ultimate life form, the perfect combination of offense and defense. His entire body was both a deadly weapon and an impenetrable shield. Slowly, Carrera observed his entire body. The fine, silvery hairs that ran from his forehead down his back gave the appearance of a long head of hair, but upon closer inspection, each hair had a tiny ridge that resembled a blade. Every single one was made of crimson steel that shone every color of the rainbow, depending on the angle you observed from. I suppose each hair is a god-class blade. I don't know how he controls them, but they could chop me up into bits if I'm not careful. On Xeranas's head were a pair of antennae. 2 pairs of red, glowing wings sprouted from his back, and 3 pairs of arms were poised on both sides in a fighting stance. Those wings are bad news, too. Is he compressing his energy into them? They seem pretty densely packed. If he released all that, it could change the whole shape of this planet. It could very well be more destructive than the extreme magic Carrera held sway over. That was how much energy she could feel from those 2 pairs of wings. And then there were those 6 arms. 1 pair was casually folded across his chest, but the other 2 were ready for battle. The arms on the bottom were crossed together, ready to fire magic on a moment's notice. The pair on top, on the other hand, changed color and form as they went along, becoming thin and blade-like at the end and emitting a dull sort of shine. If he had struck with those bladed arms first, he would have had a good chance of amputating both of Carrera's arms. As Carrera continued to observe, Xeranas placed a foot on the prone Zeph. It was akin to stepping on his own son, but the truth was even worse. "What are you?" Carrera's question was met with a sort of crunching, chewing sound coming from Xeranas's foot. Right before her eyes, he was consuming his son, the chief insectoid general. Hey, he was bragging about how he was gonna be the next creator and stuff. Carrera's eyes narrowed. Was he actually this disposable to you the whole time? Xeranas answered that question with a loud, high-pitched laugh. Don't be ridiculous. My successor must be the strongest. Even stronger than me. No one weaker than I could ever become a creator. Suddenly, Xeranas moved. The mouth that appeared on the sole of his foot had finished consuming Zeph, and having absorbed his knowledge and experience, he turned it into his own. He, too, now spoke more smoothly than before, and the power. Carrera desperately tried to defend herself. But her arms didn't work. Oh. If I take that undefended, I won't be able to recover from that damage. She accelerated her thoughts 1,000,000 times over only to reach that conclusion. Life, or at least the life she had led in this incarnation, could be cruel to her. But for this instant, it was not to be. Someone caught Xeranas's kick. Wah ha 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 ha. Now I'm ready to pitch in. I've had enough of being patient. The girl smiled happily, her light pink hair blowing in the wind, like she was enjoying this. This was Carrera's new friend, the demon lord Milim Nava herself, one of the strongest figures in the world. Let me handle this guy, Carrera. With that, Milim and Xeranas plunged into all-out combat. Carrera no longer had any role to play. So much for that, she said. I still have a lot to learn. Better get myself healed. Quickly and calmly, Carrera moved on. As she repaired her body, her focus shifted to Obila's team, for whom she saw the battle was growing more intense and deadlier than expected. With Zeth out of the picture, Period and Mujika were the only insect masters left, but they were both serious trouble. That held especially true for Period, wife of Xeranus and mother to the entire insecta race. She seemed to be gaining more power by the second. 5 members of the team, led by Obila, were fighting her, Midray being the sole exception. Obila was the commander and tank of the party. Once fatigue got the best of her, Geld stepped right in to replace her. The remaining 3, Carillion, Frey, and Gobdaranga, were using hit-and-run tactics to attack Period. This was a pretty dangerous approach in Carrera's eyes. Carillion and Frey were part of the Million class, but they were almost fully spent. A single strike from Period could be fatal. But they were still out there attacking and trying to defend themselves. Obila and Geld were busily occupying Period's attention, but one misstep would lead to almost certain disaster. It meant Obila and Geld had extremely important roles. With no healer in the group, there was no way to sustain this fight without Geld and his self-regenerative skills. Midray, meanwhile, had subbed in for Geld against Mujika, making it a one-on-one fight again. Mujika had greatly powered up, his EP stat now far higher than Midray's. However, it was a close battle, seesawing a bit but otherwise pretty even. This was thanks to Midray fighting with 100% of his force. All the restrictions he usually placed on himself were lifted. He knew now was no time to hold back, and he was showing off his dragon body form, something he only broke out when sparring with Milim. He was still human, but his arms and legs were covered in dragon scales, and he had similar protection under his clothes, except at the joints of his limbs. This didn't mean a statistical rise in EP for Midray, it just meant he was finally tapping into all his power. When Midray threw all the rules aside and fought the way he really was, this was the result. Perhaps that was why this battle had become so heated, with both sides feeling each other out and even waging something of a psychological war on top of the physical one. "Wow, Midray, good job," said Carrera. "I was curious about who'd win in a fight between you and Zijin, but now I think it's pretty much a toss-up." Carrera, watching, couldn't help but cheer for him. It was perhaps the greatest endorsement Midray had ever received. Mujika, after all, was a self-styled warrior, one very sure of his skills. Geld would have pummeled him long ago otherwise. He was even with Geld before he powered up, but now his EP had multiplied several times over. It was easily triple Midray's, an overwhelming difference. But there he was, fighting on equal terms with Mujika. How impossible was this? If Midray ever got serious, he probably could beat Zijin. But what if Zijin adjusted his intensity to match Midray's? The way Carrera saw it, it was impossible to predict who'd win. After a few intense opening salvos, Midray and Mujika stood at a distance from each other, observing. They were both looking for an opening, hoping to avoid any careless errors. Then Mujika spoke up. "Impressive. May I ask your name?" "Midray. Will you give me yours? The name of someone fierce enough to entertain me is well worth remembering." Though they were enemies, they were willing to acknowledge each other's talents. Mujika felt a lot more human-like after Reconstruct Life was invoked on him. His skills had a robotic feel before, now they were sharper, more innovative. The shift wasn't lost on Midray, who had a higher opinion of Mujika than ever. He wouldn't have exposed his full dragon body form otherwise. But this was war, and these were two enemies. They might respect each other, but the ultimate aim was to kill their opponent. So Midray shot out his left fist in a fluid motion, smiling all the while. Then, pulling back with even more speed, he used the recoil to unleash a spinning kick. It was a kind of feint, and for Midray, it didn't end there. That first fist strike allowed him to compress the air inside his fist, then shoot it out later. This air was also infused with fighting spirit, so the resulting force was greater than even your typical magic bullet. Mujika had his sword ready once he saw the fist coming, allowing him to deflect the projectile of compressed air. But immediately after that, Midray's kick cleanly entered the gap from lifting his sword high. NGGH. The force penetrated Mujika's armor, running through his entire body and affecting all his physical functions. That kick, too, was filled with Midray's fighting spirit. He was a master of battle will. Just as the Dragon Fist school had sprouted up in the other world Veilgrind had visited, there was a similarly unique school introduced here in the Key world. Its core movements resembled pre-modern Kora Judo, but its focus was on working one's fighting spirit into martial art attacks. It was a wild, uninhibited style, as befitted its founder Milim, and while it didn't have a name yet, it could be called Ryuma Ken, or Dragon Demon Fist. There was none of the Hunpo inheritance ritual seen in Dragon Fist. It was up to each practitioner to acquire the school's accumulated knowledge and experience themselves. In a Key world, an individual's lifespan might vary wildly and be greatly extended based on the lifestyle they pursued. Simply training and managing one's physical condition through battle will could multiply one's lifespan several times over, and someone like Midray, with a pedigree that harkened back to his ancestors, could make it past 1,000 years. Midray himself, in fact, was over 2,000 years old, and he had spent all that time training, the main secret behind his strength. The force behind Midray's kick made Mujika take a step back. He looked down at the spot where he was hit, and his eyes opened wide. His shell armor, which couldn't be scratched by any normal attack, sported a healthy dent and had a few pieces missing. Low-level Insector soldiers had no sense of fear. They launched repeated suicide attacks against any foe they were ordered to strike. However, the rarity of higher-ranked Insectors allowed them to instinctively grasp the difference in power between them and their opponents. An Insect Master could make these predictions with great accuracy as well. However, this ability could only gauge an adversary's core ability. It couldn't surmise what their foe's skills were capable of. It also required the Insector to actually fight the person they wanted to evaluate, of course. Thanks to the blow he'd just received, Mujika was on high alert. Period had helped him grow stronger, but he could calmly conclude he might lose if this fight went on too long. The only course of action, then, was to show his respect for his opponent and demonstrate only his best techniques, powered by all his strength at once. Have a taste of this, consuming fang. Mujika's weapon, strictly speaking, was not a sword but a pure blade forged from aluminium. As he evolved, it, too, grew sharper and sharper. He also put his magical force into this god-class blade, making it powerful enough to cut through all matter. This was what Midray faced, but he didn't move. Instead, with a mighty HNNNGH, he raised his left arm and caught Mujika's blade. Yes, caught it. A dull, unpleasant thud echoed, almost deafening in volume. It was the melody played by the collision of two equally tough and powerful forces. No, Mujika gasped. Why the surprise? With the right attitude, it's easy to make a weapon out of your own body. It wasn't that easy. Mujika was right to be surprised. But Midray was constantly training against Milim, the most unfair of opponents. What was normal to Midray was extremely abnormal to others, although he never caught on to this. To him, anyone was capable of it if they tried hard enough. Of course, this wasn't done by sheer willpower alone. The dragon scales covering him were one reason, but it also stemmed from a certain skill. Midray was controlling his own fighting spirit, using it to literally harden his body. He could anticipate when an attack was coming, focusing his attention on the body part being targeted. Then he'd gather all his fighting force around that part, despite the blow to the rest of his defense. That gave his left arm enough defensive strength to withstand the power of god-class weapons, but using sheer willpower to achieve that was beyond reckless. Only Midray could pull off something like that. His true nature was close to a dragon god, a title Gable would likely obtain someday. The strength of his body, imbued with divinity throughout, gave him the kind of willpower that would compete with god-class strikes. Those skills, of course, weren't limited to defense. Now it's my turn. With a grin, Midray lowered himself, his left hand still on the blade. It was like a Shikodachi stance from karate, legs out wide and bent like a sumo wrestler. The vast amount of energy generated in his left arm flowed to his right fist. As it did, he took in the energy coursing through the terrain beneath him through his feet, tapping into the force of the planet itself and making it his own in his body. This was planet unity, a Ryuma Ken move. It exacted an unimaginably harsh toll on the body, but Midray's willpower was able to wrangle and tame it. Anything else that happened in the future didn't matter to him. Winning was all that mattered. NNGH? Mujika sensed the danger. But it was already too late. Dragonic Blast, Midray shouted. This was the moment Midray had waited for, his most powerful secret move, easily surpassing even Dragonic Cannon. At first glance, it looked like a simple thrust of his arm, just like the one that had shredded the insect master Sarl's body. Its power, however, was beyond any law of nature or any definition of common sense in this world. Mujika certainly couldn't comprehend it. Only after a large hole was opened in his shell armor did he understand just how unusual a fighter Midray was. Simply being on my guard wasn't enough? Mujika wondered. Perhaps old age has slowed me. It was, indeed, too late for Mujika. These were his final thoughts, but strangely, he was comfortable with this defeat. He had lived and died satisfied with himself, not as an insect master, but as a warrior. Nice one, Midray, thought Carrera, eyes wide. She liked him already, but this demonstration of strength was even more praiseworthy in her mind. Simply getting to watch this advanced exchange between two awakened masters felt like a tremendously useful experience for her. For now, though, the sole remaining problem was a more important matter. With Mujika defeated, Carrera's allies could pool all their resources together against this threat. Carrera thought it'd be nice if she could join the effort, but her battered and bruised body wasn't quite listening to her yet. That was just how devastating Xeranus's strike had been. Carrera was frustrated with her own pitiful state, but she still calmly analyzed the situation. These insects really are such a pain. That was her conclusion, and she meant every word of it. Had just experienced yet another power boost. Defeating Mujika was good and all, but it had just added to strength. The reason? She had absorbed Mujika's force. Zeth's power had been directly taken by Xeranus, so none of that went back to but when someone like Mujika died on the battlefield, received every bit of that power, strength she could use to perform reconstruct life on herself. That was what made supreme ruler of this fight, such a tricky foe. Her entire body was covered with samurai-like armor, with an eerie-looking sword in one hand. Mujika's traits and experiences had become her own, which meant had a certain mastery of melee combat as well. Her weaknesses are disappearing, one after the other, thought Carrera. If she can take strength from everyone in the area like this, I'm really glad we followed that no casualties order to the letter. The power of anyone who died on this battlefield, friend or foe, went straight to The only way to break that cycle was to destroy the barrier covering the field. But that was impossible because both Xeranus, leader of the Insectors, and the demon lord Milim were devoting energy to keeping it up. If it weren't for that, this whole planet would have been blown apart long ago. Xeranus's goal was to rule this planet, not destroy it, the only real point both sides agreed on. This naturally led to barrier-based protection around the fight, but thanks to that, was gradually becoming invincible. It was a headache of a situation, but it was too late to do much about it. But I guess she won't get any stronger now, right? We can't panic here. We just have to find some way to handle this. Apart from the king and his queen, there were no Insector survivors left. Unless some of Carrera's allies were killed, there would be no further powering up for the day. Obila and Midray, too, had realized this, and that dictated their strategy. They were stretching this out over the long run, avoiding reckless or sacrificial attacks in favor of a slow, steady approach. It wasn't glamorous, but it'd work if practiced long enough. This was actually their strategy from the start, so nobody felt panicked or mentally burdened by it. Even if found a way to get stronger, the plan didn't change. They'd keep up their strategy, centered around Obila and Geld, and just wait until Period finally tired herself out. I gotta hand it to them. But even though the powerful Midray had joined the battle, the tide of this war wasn't turning their way. In fact, it was going in the opposite direction. Carrera grew increasingly concerned. If things continued as they were, her side would lose. The battle between Milim and Xeranus was being fought in such a different dimension that she couldn't consciously keep up with it. What she needed to think about was how to defeat Period before any of her friends got killed. They didn't have any surefire winning moves. The battle was still evenly matched, which was miraculous, but this balancing act was unlikely to last long. A single mistake, like a single hole opening up in a dam, could instantly cause the whole thing to fall apart. I need to do something before that. Carrera frowned in anger once more. She glared at her right arm. It showed no sign of responding to her. If she couldn't move, there was no reason for her to be there. That was a big problem, one that made Carrera ask why she was even on the battlefield. She had sought strength for so long because of occasions like these. Her golden gun began to faintly glow. Then I will lend you my strength. Carrera heard a voice in her ear, one she never expected. No way. She was startled for the first time in ages. Then, at the next moment, the battle was like a mythical legend revived. The fists of Milim and Xeranus, tearing through the air, made the atmosphere shake and the earth tremble. It was so intense, it felt like the planet itself would soon shatter. There was only one reason why that didn't happen. Xeranus and Milim were protecting this battlefield with their respective defense barriers. This was also why Milim didn't join the fight from the beginning. After assessing the effects of Carrera's abyss annihilation, she calculated the damage this war would exact on the planet. Based on that, she took measures to protect this entire planet with her barrier. Milim might have been a tyrant, but even she had her thoughtful side. Everything she said and did was based on what she wanted to do, but behind the scenes, she could also accurately predict and understand the consequences of those actions. It was a kind of dual personality, but Milim Nava did her best to make both of them coexist. So while Milim had left chief ass-kicking duties to Carrera, she soon realized she wasn't the only one looking out for this planet. Xeranus, the Insector leader, was doing the same thing. He must be having the same thought I did. That's kinda troublesome. Milim never saw this coming. Xeranus was trying to take over this world, of course, so if you thought about it for a moment, it made sense. But in Milim's mind, this wasn't something she could readily agree with. If this was a plain old barrier, it wouldn't be a problem, but his barrier had a few effects added that helped the enemy. Milim wanted to bust it up, but that might affect her own barrier and cause untold damage to this planet. NNNGH. Look at him, using my barrier like that. He's got a lot of nerve. It was annoying, but Milim had to admit, Xeranus's barrier was keeping her from making any untoward moves. It proved the enemy leader had a good head on his shoulders, and Milim knew she couldn't afford to lose her temper. She preferred to solve most of her problems with violence, but when faced with an enemy that might very well rival her, she had no choice but to proceed with caution. So after waiting for the right moment, it was finally her turn. Xeranus was on the move. Milim quickly followed suit, but then a problem came along. The ever-careful Xeranus had tinkered with his barrier, preventing her from breaching it. It'd take less than 10 seconds to dismantle, but accepting that delay could be a fatal blunder. It was really just a tiny thing, but clearly Milim had been outfoxed. She had to praise her enemy for it, but she also calmly vowed to get her revenge. She was only dealing with this problem because she had arrived just in time to help with Carrera's crisis. Carrera was unlikely to die, but if she did, no one could tell what that might do to Milim's anger level. The world could breathe a sigh of relief about that. Regardless, Milim had avoided the worst-case scenario, and all that remained was to defeat Xeranus. She couldn't wait to get started. Xeranus was strong. He blocked Milim's fist without a second thought, sharply hitting back with his own. Milim took this attack in stride as well, responding with kicks, elbows, and headbutts in a fluid motion. Xeranus kept up with each attack, never falling behind for a moment. A fierce battle ensued, both fighters using nothing but their own bodies as weapons. "Not bad," said Milim. "I'm not going easy at all, but you can play with me at this level, huh?" "Hair. Don't make me laugh. I worried about what you, the creator's daughter, were capable of, but this seems like nothing serious." Xeranus responded to Milim's chit-chat with sheer arrogance, but he wasn't letting his guard down. He was acting above Milim, but inside he was exercising every caution possible. Pride and self-conceit were not in his dictionary. He was supremely powerful but never overconfident. No matter who his opponent was, Xeranus never let his guard down and never gave less than a full effort. Thanks to that, Xeranus was wary of more than just Milim. He always strove to do his best, never underestimating either the strong or the weak. So he put a little trick into his barrier to delay Milim's entry into the fray, and during that little instant, he planned to take out Carrera and make her power his own. That wound up not happening for two reasons. Milim's brain ran faster than Xeranus expected, and Carrera was more stubborn than he ever imagined. Failing to finish off Carrera was another blow for him. If she recovered enough to join forces with Milim, that would be trouble. The battle could drag on without end, to the point that she might get to use another once-per-day judgment bullet. Calmly looking over the situation, Xeranus found little reason to be optimistic. So in the midst of his conversation with Milim, he tried a rather high-end tactic. "If this makes her let her guard down, then great, but we'll just have to see what the creator's daughter can do." Xeranus pondered the thought as he watched for Milim's response. Milim, meanwhile, laughed as haughtily as she could. "Wah ha 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 ha. Well, look at you, huh? You better keep on entertaining me, then." And then Milim took this seriously for the first time. Beautiful crimson horns sprouted from her forehead, parting her red hair. Dragon wings spread out from her back, a suit of jet-black armor covering her whole body. In her hand was the Tema sword that Guy gave her. It was rare for Milim to ever use a weapon. It was a sign of her admiration for Xeranus, no matter what she said to him. Xeranus realized this performance wasn't working on her. If so, there was no reason to keep it going. "If you're that strong," a curious Milim said, "then how come you're being so cautious? Are you a big coward or what?" "Hair." Xeranus wasn't about to hide his feelings. "What do you mean, coward? Better to be a victorious coward than a rash, fearless loser." He retained his regal bearing, assuring Milim he had nothing to be ashamed of. It was what Xeranus truly believed, and took pride in. "Victorious? What are you trying to do anyway?" "Hair. Isn't it obvious? My mission is to surpass the Creator." That, too, was the unvarnished truth. Ever since Veldenava first named him, Xeranus had been wondering why he existed. Unlike Feldway, he wasn't blinded by respect for his creator. Instead, he constantly searched for a mission to devote his life to. Then, after a lengthy trial and error process, he found that mission: surpass his parents. Xeranus already had an immortal body. Every cell of it was controlled directly by his mind, which could instantly repair and replace at will, even faster than any chemical process. Illness and injury did not affect him, and his being transcended any numerical lifespan. But despite that, if his energy was fully depleted, he would die. His body was immortal, but his spirit had its limits. In other words, he wasn't so immortal after all. He knew he had to surpass Veldenava, but in his current form, he could not fully resist death. That made him a coward all the way, someone willing to take any measure to bring himself higher, and so he gathered followers, never attempting to complete the puzzle himself. He created Period to be his spouse, even knowing the risk involved. With her, he created the children who would do his bidding. These children, like their father Xeranus, sought strength. Zeth in particular was quite similar to him, and just as timid. He was also sneaky and cunning, enough to try to eliminate his newborn brother before he proved a threat, enough to hatch a plan to consume the individual birth to become the next queen and make her power his own. That plan had failed, it seemed, but all that was none of Xeranus's business. He let his children do what they wanted. If Zeth became the next creator, nothing would make Xeranus happier. He was the father and Zeth was his son. Whoever won would be the righteous among them, charged with building the next epoch. But Xeranus had no intention of handing the throne over to Zeth. Once he was done raising him, he intended to seize his power. As time passed, though, he instead won Zeth's trust through love and affection, gaining a full view of his powers at all times to better ensure his victory. In this case, he had used Zeth as a kind of test against the dangerous Carrera. Now that he had taken Zeth's power, Xeranus had reached a conclusion with him that he was perfectly fine with. And as long as someone as strong as him could be so cunning, so endlessly cautious in his behavior, he was as good as undefeatable. That was why he gave Milim the truth, with no shame or hesitation whatsoever. When she heard him, Milim saw Xeranus was more of a danger than she'd assumed. Figuring he'd be impossible to corral later at this rate, she decided she'd go all out to defeat him now. "I'd love to play with you more," Milim said, her face serious, "but unfortunately, you're too dangerous for that. Sorry, but from now on, I'm gonna apply my full effort to this." Without waiting for a reply, she released her power. Xeranus could no longer take it easy. He had no choice but to reply in kind. "Ha! You will make a fine diversion before I reach for the top. Show me the power of the Creator's daughter." No longer concerned about the potential effect on the planet, he released his accumulated, disastrous force. The air trembled as great wells of power grew out of both sides. If there was no appreciable gap in their technical skills, a simple battle would turn into a slog that dragged on forever. Both of them knew that, and so Milim opted to finish this up fast with a special magic of hers. Xeranus, preparing for that, got his fighting spirit ready. The resulting clash between Milim's aura and Xeranus's spirit caused small, compressed explosions in the air. The shock waves alone could have raised your typical monster on the spot. Even a high-level magic born wouldn't have weathered the effects too well. There was no way a third party could enter this battle, now surrounded by massive, random explosions. Everyone had evacuated already, watching the proceedings from afar outside the barrier. If they had been even a little late, a hellish scene would have unfolded. But despite the force field of energy that was already being generated, the real show had yet to begin. "I got the perfect thing for you. Drago Nova." Stellar particles shimmered between Milim's hands, whirling around as they bore a destructive force not of this world. She bundled them together and shot them towards Xeranus. Even if Xeranus had the power to twist space to his needs it'd be impossible to avoid such an attack. Milim, thinking that far ahead, threw all her tyrannical force on him at once. It was sheer reckless violence, perhaps befitting the girl they called the Destroyer, and it was the right move to make. In a battle between two supernatural beings, the longer a fight dragged on, the more intense the resulting damage. Since the two of them had joined forces to create a barrier around themselves, Milim decided to take advantage and bring the fight to Xeranus. Xeranus, on the other hand, used the same tactic as Milim, an instant kill move meant to annihilate his enemy. Devour it all, Devastator virus. Dark microparticles rose from his body, blocking the shine of Drago Nova as if they had their own free will. They were actually some of the dark cells that made up Xeranus's own body. As Xeranus was capable of freely controlling any substance he took in from his home world, he could also make his own cells microscopic enough to invade the bodies of his enemies. These tiny cells, each infused with his will, could break through magical barriers to devour their target from the inside out. There was no way for any ordinary person to resist them. So Milim's shimmering light and Xeranus's dark particles crossed paths. The light drove out the darkness, but the darkness swallowed up the light. It all happened in an instant, but one so tense that it seemed infinite. It also wasn't what either side wanted to see. Milim sought an overwhelming victory, while Xeranus wanted to consume Milim. Finally, though, the result became clear. When the light and darkness ran their courses, Milim was standing. The dark microparticles clung to her body, but her aura was enough to destroy all of them. It was a fatiguing experience for Milim, but she was unharmed. As for Xeranus. So this is pain. I never thought there was something I couldn't consume. Shockingly, he was safe. Millem's Drago nova was mainly composed of special matter known as stellar particles. This matter, controllable only by Millem, packed more destructive power than even spiritual particles. Unless someone could fully analyze its properties, there was no chance of manipulating it at all. It was little wonder Xeranus failed to consume them, but he was able to cancel them out. He sustained some damage, but it was easily healable and didn't impact his ability to keep fighting one bit. So Millem was mentally winded, and Xeranus was just a little worse for wear physically. Those were the sole results of this clash of finishers. Xeranus got back up, his compound eyes studying Millem. Then he had a thought. Can I really win like this? Millem, daughter of the Creator, was truly powerful. It was said that she'd inherited the lion's share of the Creator's power, but some aspects still seemed to be hidden, unfathomable. In fact, Xeranus was sure of it. He had seen the barren lands, the ruins where Millem had once waged a life-or-death struggle with the demon Lord Guy. Just like now, Xeranus had taken a cautious approach, gathering every piece of information he could. That land, also known as the Deadly Desert, was created over 2,000 years ago, and even now it was polluted with excessive amounts of magicules. The power of Millem's Drago nova was stupendous, but not even that could cause so much environmental contamination. He had to assume it was something else, but what? That was unclear, and it unnerved him. Victory at all costs, including death, wasn't what Xeranus wanted. He had to win, but it had to be safely, with no room for error. His belief in this approach was absolute, and based on it, he felt that further battle was too dangerous. He didn't want anything unexpected to happen, but Millem was just too full of unknowns. It was at that point that retreat began to seem like an attractive option to Xeranus. Then, right after that, something happened that forced him to make up his mind. Carrera, hearing the voice of someone who wasn't supposed to be there, realized she couldn't spend another moment as a spectator. She couldn't believe it, but she also wasn't foolish enough to think this was some kind of dream. "Hey there," she said. "Didn't die after all, huh?" "Hair. Thanks to how weak you are, I had to be summoned from the afterlife." The man smiling wryly at her was Lieutenant Kondo, someone Carrera was sure she had killed herself. Unbeknownst to Carrera, Masayuki had just invoked his ultimate skill, Lord of Heroes. This Kondo did exist, but was not exactly a living person. He was an Einherjar, akin to a digital life form. Kondo's presence would normally be impossible, but thanks to Masayuki's skill, he had rushed over to Carrera in her time of greatest need. Now, don't tell me the demon powerful enough to kill me is going to meet her end here. Don't believe it for a minute. I was just about to punch this guy out, too, until you so rudely interrupted me. Kondo didn't bother asking Carrera how. He just smiled, nodded, and said, "Good, then. I'll help you if you'll let me." It was a very casual offer, and Carrera accepted it as a matter of course. "Well, given the state I'm in, sure." Her pride as a demon wasn't a concern. In fact, she sounded happy about this. A new and powerful partnership had just been formed. Despite the desperate situation, the two were casually working out their plans. "So what's your strategy?" Carrera asked. "You gonna beat her for me or what?" Now that they were a team, Carrera was already making some pretty harsh demands. It made Kondo roll his eyes at her, sighing. "Well, not even I could beat someone like that." He always was a realist. And although he was only several minutes old in this manifestation, he still calmly, accurately grasped the situation. The subsequent decision he made was just as rational. "But fortunately for us, her eyes are on everyone else," he said. "Oh? If we can't win the normal way, we'll just have to use a hidden trick." Kondo put his hand on top of Carrera's. His intention was to pour his power into the golden gun in Carrera's hand. "Holding my hand out of nowhere. You're gonna make me blush." "Quiet, now's not the time for jokes like that." Carrera was actually pretty serious. Getting the cold shoulder like that made her pretty angry. But Kondo was right. If she wanted to keep her friends out of harm's way, they needed to defeat the enemy, and they needed to do it right now. She focused her attention on what Kondo was trying to do. Then it dawned on her. Oh. Your judgment bullet? Yes. I've put all my power into it. You just focus on using this. He didn't ask whether she was well versed in the weapon by now. Carrera noticed that, too. It made her feel a little better. Right, she said, a big smile on her face as she accepted the job. I'm on it. Period was dominating the battlefield. There were twists and turns along the way, but things were generally going how she wanted them to. There were far fewer deaths than expected, though, which was problematic, and none at all even from the enemy side. Some were injured seriously enough to require evacuation, but they all must have been given magic or potion-based first aid, because not a single one lost their life for her. She had gone to the trouble of creating this special force field to capture the power seeping out of the dead that had no doubt be strewn across this field, but it didn't produce nearly the results she hoped for. Still, though, eating my children allowed me to join all our power together. There's that upside, at least. Her power had skyrocketed to unimaginable levels since the start of battle. It was in more than just comparative energy, too. She had taken on all her children's skills and their mastery of them. Adding these newly acquired melee combat skills to the dominate space she already specialized in, she'd no longer lag behind these annoying worms clinging to her. Those worms, Obila, Midray, Carillion, Frey, Geld, and Gobta were demonstrating some excellent coordination, keeping the damage to a minimum for them all. They couldn't do a thing to mortally wound Period, but they were proving to be surprisingly difficult to kill. It was frustrating. I don't like this anymore. After all this power I've gained, I still can't beat these guys. With enough time, she would surely win. She understood that, but she still couldn't contain her irritation. What peeved her most of all was the magic-born Geld. He was no powerhouse compared with Period, but he was vexingly tenacious. He should have been near death long ago, after all the killer attacks and direct hits he had taken the full brunt of, but he just kept getting back up over and over again. His eyes, too, so irksome. He must have known the difference in strength between them, but he just kept glaring at Period, like he was never going to give up. Almost like he was assured of victory, somehow. You all really need to stop messing with me, you know. If anyone should be glaring like that, it's me. Obila she could understand. They had sent out scout insectors to investigate the cryptids, so they had naturally received reports about the opposing force Obila led. After witnessing her strength in this battle, Period knew Obila was a dangerous figure. She had fired off 2 major strikes to try and exhaust Obila. Period definitely had no intention of belittling her. But she hadn't counted on the presence of a pest like Geld. He's only as good as Mujika before Reconstruct Life worked its magic on him, but his sheer durability is incredible. How long is he willing to hold out against me? This is why specialized types like him are such a pain. Period tried to quiet her irritation and keep her composure. Then, as if to vent her anger, she waved a feeler to launch a cross-dimension slash. Most of them, however, were cancelled out by Geld's Chaos Eater. The slashes that remained were also neatly avoided, serving to anger Period even more. This wasn't a lack of strength on her part, it was just the result of Geld and everyone else risking their lives and putting in the best effort they could. Gobta had conquered his fear, dedicating himself to distracting Period. Ranga was joining the effort, fully trusting in his partner. Midray was enjoying the fight, but he also knew death would end the fun quickly. Overcoming his own fears, he was striving purely to finish off this foe. And Carillion and Frey, fully displaying their awakened strength, were raining attacks on her from land and air. All that training in Ramiriz's labyrinth was really paying off. Without that experience, they would have mismanaged their strengths and been forced to retreat long ago. Obila, meanwhile, was demonstrating an accurate read of the war situation as she gave her commands. Geld's continued safety was thanks in large part to her spreading tank duties around the party. Speaking of Geld, he was about to pass out. Just as Period thought, it was a miracle he was still alive. Pure willpower kept him upright. His full-body armor was cracked to pieces, rendered really nothing but a pile of wreckage. His body had long passed its limit, becoming so battered not even ultra-speed regeneration could keep up with the damage. He was only able to fight because of a certain secret behind his powers. Beelzebub, the ultimate gift given to him, included skills like stand-in, which let him take damage for other people, and grant protection, which boosted his allies' defense. However, combining these two powers granted a completely different effect. Basically, he could flip stand-in around and let other people take the damage he received. This allowed him to constantly adjust and fine-tune the damage to his body, spreading it around to the members of his forces. Even that, however, had its limits. His troops said they could take on more, but Geld knew they were lying to him. Everyone was at the end of their rope, just like he was. But Geld still held his ground, eyes forward, never looking away from Period. Rimuru once told him the first person who looks away in a fight loses, merely a casual remark he made over drinks at some party, but Geld took that to be literal gospel. Whether or not it was actually true, he was willing to use his own strength to turn it into the truth. That was the kind of person Geld was. But even for him, the end had to come. After another barrage, he finally fell to his knees. MNGH. I can't stand up, he groaned. He. Finally down, are you? Well, I commend your effort, I'll make sure to kill you last. Period laughed in his face. Her offer to kill Geld last wasn't out of pity, she just wanted to take her time tormenting him later. It was just an experiment, in her mind, to see how many more of her attacks he could withstand. Besides, focusing purely on Geld would be ill-advised. None of her other foes were nearly as durable, and if they weren't, it was better to pick them all off before they became worse threats. Now that her main obstacle was gone, her victory was assured. If any uncertainty remained, it revolved around Period's master Xeranus. He had entered into battle with the demon lord Milim, and there was no way yet to know how that would turn out. That battle was part of the plan, but Milim's total power was unknown. Period didn't doubt for a moment Xeranus would win, but they couldn't afford any unpleasant surprises. She wanted to go over and help him as soon as possible, just to be sure. But now that this stubborn fool is down for the count, the rest of these wimps should be much easier. Convinced of her victory, Period prepared to launch a finisher move against Obila and the rest, but then she stopped. A cold chill had just run down her spine. Someone, or something, had entered the space controlled by her. How? Only a small handful of people could ever come in here. Even among all the great powers she had been told about before, entering this controlled space from the outside was supposed to be nigh impossible. Even if they broke the space open like Milim did, she should have noticed someone meddling with the barrier long before they breached it. But here was this person just waltzing in, like that barrier was thin air. There was no way anyone could do something like that. If there was, it couldn't be any ordinary type of life form. Period nimbly determined the intruder's position and turned her eyes in their direction. Then she saw a golden glow, the gleam from the barrel of a gun, the muzzle of which was pointed straight at her. Holding it was June, the original Yellow, someone Period had dismissed as permanently sidelined. Another figure, the intruder Period detected, was standing close to June, almost supporting her, his eyes fixed sharply on Period's head. They were clearly trying to do something so threatening, it even made Period shudder. Stop. Before she could say any more, the bullet shattered her head, unerringly reaping the life from her very existence. And so, without even a moment to leave a few regretful words, she was gone. Xeranus sensed Period's disappearance. Her presence was gone, in other words, she was dead. It was an alarming situation. Time to move on, he muttered, finally committing to his retreat. A dubious Milim asked. I said that any further fighting is pointless. Period's passing was an unexpected development for Xeranus. It threw a wrench into the entire plan of operation, and he could no longer worry about winning the battle presented to him. If he kept fighting Milim, the result remained a coin flip. He only kept tangling with her because Period was supposed to kill off the horde of enemy leaders, seize their powers, and then support him. If she collected the power of all the warriors together and invoked Reconstruct Life on herself, the results wouldn't outclass Xeranus, but she'd almost certainly be reborn as an intensely powered-up version of herself. All that was off the table. He was devoting himself to a fight he wasn't sure he could win. And Xeranus wasn't so assured of himself that he was willing to introduce such an element of uncertainty into his plans. And he had an even bigger worry to contend with, too. This space was covered by a combined barrier meant to reduce the damage to this planet. But thanks to the death of Period, one of the figures supporting that barrier, it was palpably weaker than before. Milim had been hiding her full force, and Xeranus, too, still wasn't fighting all out. But then he decided continuing the battle any longer could lead to unforeseen problems. "You're running?" Milim remarked. "Ha!" Xeranus snickered at Milim's provocation. Milim was no fool. She knew she wouldn't be able to exercise her full force if the barrier disappeared. That was why she wanted to wrap this up quickly, and since that failed, she didn't have much reason to keep Xeranus anyway. Milim truly was hiding her power. She hadn't used a certain skill imbued within her yet, but if she did, she didn't see defeating Xeranus as that difficult. But the fallout from that would be a headache. Once Milim's skill was invoked, it was difficult to stop. It had put her past her limits, causing her to lose all reason and go into an out-of-control rampage. Frey once described it to Clayman as a stampede, and she wasn't lying, it really would happen that way. Milim had described it to Frey casually, like she was talking about a passing case of the sniffles, but there was no denying the truth behind it. Everyone's exhausted right now. Some of them will be in real danger if their treatment's delayed any longer. Instead of forcing myself to beat this guy, it'd be smarter to step back and regroup. That was the conclusion Milim came to. She opted to let Xeranus off the hook. Carrera saw Period was gone. It made her smile. He. Look. We won. She turned around to speak to Kondo. He wasn't there. He had never been formally summoned by Masayuki's skill. Instead, he forcibly manifested himself, using the golden gun he gave Carrera as a medium. One could feasibly describe him as a mirage, an illusion, created by the fervent hopes inside Carrera's mind. "Heh," she said. "Oh, I know. I'm so clearly worthless in your eyes, so you got worried for me and rushed on over, right?" She kept smiling as she spoke to the empty space. It was sad, but Carrera could endure it. Now she was determined to become even stronger, so she wouldn't have to go through this charade next time. Gogta let out a victorious war cry. Ranga howled in triumph to accompany him. They actually resembled each other a lot in a charming way. Geld, completely out of energy, collapsed, with Obila helping him up and congratulating him on his effort. Carillion and Frey nodded at each other, lending a hand to Obila as they shared a laugh with Geld. Gable and his team hurried to the scene, placing Geld on a stretcher and sprinkling copious amounts of potion on him. They were making quite a scene, but he didn't seem to be in critical danger, at least. As Geld and the others were being carried back to Tempest, Midray muttered to himself, the emotion clear in his voice, "We won." "We sure did, Midray," Carrera agreed. "Well done." "Heh. It feels a tad awkward, being praised by a primal who's lived longer than me." "Well, is that bad? If I see talent in someone, I want to pay them my respects." "I'm honored." The conversation stopped there. Midray and Carrera basked in the afterglow for a while. Given all the wounded, it was difficult to call it a complete victory, but no one on their side was dead. That alone was enough for Carrera. As far as this battle was concerned, she had given strict orders to the demons under her command to retrieve the souls of anyone who died. The lack of casualties this time allowed her to cope with the damage, But if they had been hit by something like Obila's powerful wide-area attack, the number of wounded and dead would have been too great to reverse. The fact they were all able to celebrate their safety like this was a great victory. "I'm going to get stronger," Carrera vowed. The demons I heard about were these heartless monsters who couldn't understand the human heart, but actually talking to one like this, it's surprising how much we resonate with each other. "You bring that up now?" Carrera laughed at Midray's frank analysis. Midray smiled back at her. "If you're aiming for more strength, I certainly can't let you outdo me. If getting just a little serious in battle is enough to rattle me like this, I still have a while to go with my kung fu." "Ha ha ha. You're already pretty much a master, aren't you? And you're still trying to improve?" "Why not? I'll need to push my mind and body to their upper limits so I can break out my full power for longer periods of time. And along those lines, Carrera, I think you'd make a great partner." "Sounds good to me. I was just thinking I needed to further train this body my master gave me. I'll take you up on that offer." Carrera and Midray exchanged a firm handshake. They both wanted to reach the next level, so there was no reason to turn down the offer. Then, as usual, Milim butted in. "Hey! No fair. Lemme get in on this." There was no denying that smiling face, not that she would have accepted no for an answer. "Whoa, Milim," said Carrera. "Surely you don't need to get any stronger, do you?" "Yes, Lady Milim, you are already the strongest. Why would you need any more training like that?" Midray asked. Carrera was mind-blowingly strong, but there was always someone better out there. Everyone knew Milim was an anomaly among anomalies, something Carrera had come to understand all too well now that they were acquainted. Carrera was still sensible enough to treat Milim's nonsense like the joke it was, but not Midray. Unlike Carrera, he really was concerned that the one he worshipped was about to aim for a higher plane of existence. But none of that came across to Milim. "Wah ha ha ha. Don't be silly. If you guys are having fun, I'm not about to let you shut me out of it." So it was settled. Gobta could sense the danger already, or the writing on the wall, that is. He had secretly overheard their conversation as Milim descended from high above, and the subject disturbed him. He could already predict he'd be dragged into this group before long, so he found it high time to make a strategic retreat. It was a truly virtuoso assessment of his situation. "I'm gonna go report on our victory, guys," he shouted as he climbed on top of Ranga. They had deunified a while back, and rode like the wind from the battlefield. His keen eye on his surroundings, and his knack for picking up on useful information had saved him once again. Ranga trusted him on that, too. Gobta's insight into danger ahead had saved his life many times, so he followed his lead without question. He, too, was safe. As for the others... Huh? Whoa, whoa. Wait, Milim, are you trying to pull me into this, too? Midray and Carrera, the first to be corralled, weren't alone. Carillion and Frey were being forced to participate, despite their resistance. So although the war in this region had caused a great deal of damage, it seemed to have come to an end without any fatalities. Or so it seemed. Freeze everything in place, my blizzard, and put it to sleep. The world was instantly covered in white. It was as if this moment was waiting to happen until everyone had their guard down. A blizzard of despair swirled in from the outer edges of the field toward the center, encircling everyone inside before they could escape. "No way, are you?" Milim was the first to notice. It was already too late to do anything. All of them were caught completely off guard. Not many people could trick a demon lord as crafty as Milim. But if it was her, Velzad the Ice Dragon, eldest sister of the true dragons, it was far from impossible. "Long time no see, Milim," Velzad said. "What are you doing, Velzad?" He. "Just here to see my darling niece. I needed your help with something, you see. Quit fooling around. If you wanted a favor from me, you could at least act the part. Stop this blizzard at once. Then we can talk." Milim held back her anger as she tried to intimidate Velzad. Her friends were going to be in danger before long. In fact, Those on the outer rim of the battlefield were already ice statues. They weren't dead, but all their vital signs had been frozen in place. You could say they were cryogenically frozen, ready to be revived at any time, but a mere whim from Velzard would instantly smash them to pieces. Clearly, she had aimed for the moment Milim would be off her guard, right after the battle with Xeranus. But Frey felt even more concerned. If Milim flew into a rage and went out of control, the whole place would be reduced to ashes. The scale of the damage would be unimaginable, and she couldn't guess how many people would survive it. I need to make a decision. Frey felt it would be dangerous for Milim to let Velzard do whatever she wanted. The longer Frey delayed her decision, the worse things would get, so without Milim's approval, Frey sent an order to her Heaven Flyers. Strike Velzard down. With that signal, the Heaven Flyers moved at once. No one was unaware of the terror Velzard wielded. This was a suicide attack, and everyone involved was prepared for that. Milim, their beloved master, was too kind to them, almost fatally so. With every person put to sleep in the ice, Milim's patience would be tested more and more. If it broke her limit, there was no turning back. Milim was already enduring a lot out of consideration for Frey and the rest. If things got any worse, she'd have no choice but to do Velzard's bidding for the sake of her hostages. As far back as Frey could remember, the only time Milim had gotten fully serious with a fight was against Guy, destroying a whole country before Frey was even born. If she got that serious again, looking to kill, with no regard for her allies, she'd never have a hard time against any opponent. But Milim never went that far again. In a way, all the people around Milim hobbled her. She was so kind all the time like that, even now, that Frey wanted to ensure none of her friends dragged her down. Oof, too late, huh? Guys, you can run if you want to, but if you're staying, you better be ready, Carillion warned the people around him. One crisis after another, isn't it? And now it'll be against my master's aunt. I hate to fight a war I can't win, but if it's for Lady Milim's sake, I can't afford to whine about it, Midre added with a laugh. No one in the Flying Beastly Knights was leaving, either. Even the warrior priests led by Hermes had abandoned their medic roles and switched to battle mode. Everyone serving under Milim was rushing toward Velzard. Hey. Stop, all of you. You need to retreat from here at once. Milim's shouting was drowned out by the flurry of magic and spirit attacks on Velzard. Lady Milim is certainly well loved, Obila muttered to herself. I wish I could have served her sooner. The battle against Period had drained Obila. Though she was all but completely out of energy, Obila stood back up, firmly glaring at Velzard. Here was this absolute force in the world. It didn't take much thinking for everyone to know they had no chance of winning. Frey knew that, too. If survival was all that mattered to her, she would have ordered her forces to scatter and exit the area. So why didn't she? Chances were. He. Sly as always, I see. I never hated her to start with, but I sure respect her decisiveness, thought Obila. Frey's aim was to make Milim shed her self-doubt. If her friends were killed by Velzard, Milim would have no reason left to hesitate. Instantly, Frey decided that if Milim survived, that was all that mattered in the long run. Carillion and Midre followed suit as well, and all their troops also decided without hesitation to share in their fate. Every one of them loved Milim. Obila felt the same, so she could understand. She had a healthy respect for those who made the same decision as the troops she lost, and she, too, was prepared for the eventuality that this was where she'd make her last stand. Carrera, too, was still there, thinking about what she needed to do. Trying to engage the completely flawless Velzard in a drawn-out battle wasn't going to happen. Velzard wasn't nearly as kind as Vielgrind. She'd offer Carrera no way to win. Indeed, it was a matter of luck whether Carrera would even be able to escape alive. Not that escape was ever an option to her. Well, whatever, she thought. I might wind up disobeying my master's orders depending on how this turns out, but I should really join in this. I sure can't complain about having Lady Velzard as an opponent. Might as well try as hard as I can. The decision was made quickly. It wasn't great luck for the demons serving under Carrera, but in any case, there wasn't any escape from there for anyone. Victory over Velzad was the only way out, but everyone knew that wouldn't happen. All Carrera and her demons could do was guide the souls who'd be streaming out of there shortly, diverting them away from their true death. Brace yourself, guys, make sure we don't miss any. Carrera's words were met with a collective nod from her staff. By this point, healing meant nothing. All the other demons gave up on the bodies they were incarnated into as well, going back to their roots as spiritual life forms. That would reduce their influence on the material world, but if leading the dead was their next great task, it was better carried out in this form. So in a very short time, everyone was ready. But in the next instant, how foolish! These frigid words echoed through the minds of everybody on hand. It was a quiet voice, liable to be drowned out by the blizzard, but the waves of thought that carried it were worryingly loud. As if to respond to this voice, the blizzard turned into a maelstrom, bringing whiteout conditions to the whole battlefield. It was a beyond unfair form of violence, a supernatural disaster on a level beyond anyone's control. Any attempt to resist would have been met with shrill laughter. Now, go to sleep. The white ice and snow raged wildly. All the ground-level soldiers were the first to be frozen solid. They were followed by the squad captains, then the top officers. Soon, only a few were left conscious, those who had reached the million class, with an EP of 1 million or higher. Even for them, though, it was only a matter of time. Witnessing this hopeless turn of events, Frey prepared for her own death. So did Carillion and Midray. They remained upright only because Milim was protecting them all, otherwise the energy released by Velzad would have done its worst on Frey and her friends long ago. Carrera, a short distance away from Milim, was no longer able to shed her own physical body. The Lord of all Demons was unable to move an inch, and none of her servants fared any better. It went without saying that Frey's Heaven Flyers, Carillion's Flying Beastly Knights, and Midray's warrior priests were all little more than ice sculptures by that point. Velzad had not even attacked any of them, and this was the result. The blizzard itself was nothing more than her releasing her aura. For those who understood this, the experience was like feeling a helpless despair from which there was no escape. Milim, protecting the survivors, was unable to move. If she abandoned Frey and the others, their fates would be sealed. Ah, Milim, always so kind, thought Frey. You're such a sweet girl after all. I love you. Frey believed that with every fiber of her being. Feeling a gaze upon her, she turned her attention to Carillion. He was defiantly smiling. Midray sighed deeply and nodded with him. Obila was engaged in silent prayer, as if apologizing to those she held dear. These were all people resolved to their fates. I guess we're ready for this? Yeah. We'll all do it at once. As flashy as we can. Indeed. If we're going to go, I want to go while giving Lady Milim one last show of my courage. He. Now, at least, I think I understand how those who served me feel. No, they didn't die in vain at all. Now let's see if I can have something to brag about when I see them again. Milim's big four were united in mind at that moment. Then. Wait, you guys? Milim, picking up on this, tried to stop them, but they were already on the move. The four of them moved with expert coordination, as if they'd been fighting together for a millennium. They closed in on Velzad, landing a series of blows, not a single missed strike among them. Sadly, none of it worked on her. I'm glad, Velzad said. I really am. You were as strong as I thought you'd be, and so I managed to handle you without any mistakes. Velzad laughed as she calmly stood there. In front of her were four brand new ice sculptures. Then it was Milim's face that froze. Every emotion had been drained from her expression, except one. Her look was sheer rage. Robbed of her companions, she was furious. This won't stand. You took my friends away, didn't you? I'll never let you live this down. Milim's cry pierced the battlefield, as it did, her ultimate skill, Sataniel, Lord of Wrath, was activated at full power. It took in all the surrounding magicules, pouring in all its own magic force to generate further power. Using Milim's intense rage and magicule count as its fuel, this ultimate force turned into a magicule generating machine, producing more and more by the moment. This was Sataniel's true nature. It was a magicule reactor that was too powerful to ever fully use. The magicules fed into it were processed and outputted as even more power, a multiplicative process. As long as it was active, the magicule count within Milim would continually balloon higher and higher. No matter how much she consumed, the count would never go down. True ultimate power. She was called the Dragon Princess, the child of Veldenava, and that was no joke. The Demon Lord Milim was a single person who wielded unlimited force. And she was roaring again. The heavens shook, the ground broke under her. The god-class armor around her body transformed into an ominous-looking robe, as if reacting to the fury. It wasn't built to protect her from external enemies, but to prevent her from being destroyed by the power within her. The overflowing torrent of power merged with the armor, transforming it so it covered Milim's entire body, and with that, the conversion was complete. A pair of jet-black wings was on her back, the single red horn on her forehead shining with even more dazzling radiance than before. Strange patterns, etched atop tough dragon scales of dull, shifting colors, covered her skin outside of her face. This was Milim's default state, the form of the true dragon princess. Her body might have been human, but the power housed inside exceeded any true dragon, making her a pure embodiment of absolute destruction. My, I think it's the second time I've seen this, Velzad remarked. Since you're here and all, why don't I play with you a little? Die. No one was left to stop Milim. The planet trembled at the wrath of this ancient demon lord. And a moment later, it was exposed once more to the ultimate dragonoid's rage. Chapter 2. Reports and Countermeasures. Velzad's made her move? Feldway asked. Vega, who had been staring at the screen with a pallid expression, nodded. Ugh. The demon Lord Milim, that bastard Xeranus, they're both more fearsome than I ever imagined. Look at all that power. It'd take someone like Velzad to actually laugh at them. I couldn't hold a candle to her. Witnessing the fight between Milim and Xeranus made even Vega feel humble by comparison. No matter how confident he usually was, he could at least understand the power differences involved. Quit whining. I have my own feelings, you know, about our longtime enemies the Insectors finally tasting defeat. That was Zerario, who had just been called in. Milim's forces were victorious against a vicious enemy that had been a thorn in their side for far too long. Even better, despite the extensive damage, there were no deaths among Milim's followers. Maybe it was just a matter of failing to find the right strategy or the right conditions, but it was Zerario's fault for not being up to the challenge. Milim was superior to him, and that was that. It was not an excuse, but the truth. It was little wonder Zerario was less than amused about all that. So what are you gonna do about this, Feldway? He asked. By this, he meant Velzad. She seemed to have some kind of scheme underway, but Feldway didn't dwell on that further. To Zerario, it seemed like a very fast-changing situation, one pretty derailed from their original plan, and he believed it was time for a course correction or two. Someone else present was just as outraged. That's the thing. If you hadn't interfered with me, I would have defeated our divine enemy, Jahil shouted. You better explain what's going on with that, right now. Upon returning to the Celestial Palace, Feldway ordered Mai to provide a visual of the ground situation. He then ordered Zerario to bring back Jahil, who was over with Luminus's force providing a diversion. Jahil's behavior, however, went well beyond diversionary tactics. Zerario was right to stop him, but it didn't exactly please Jahil much. Jahil didn't bother hiding that, snipping at Feldway and asking for answers. Hare! Quit being in such a hurry, chided Feldway. It's not like you could have taken down the Demon Lord Luminus anyway. What? Snapped Jahil. Are you mocking me? No, I'm not. I just want to proceed with caution. Look, Now that Dagrel is in our ranks, the balance of powers shifted vastly in our favor. We've also got Fen of the 3 stellar leaders, remember. With all that, Luminous couldn't be in a more precarious position. This was Feldway's attempt at appeasing Jahil. It didn't work. Yes, I'll admit to Fen's strength. But Luminous killed my father, the great demigod, who I must avenge with my own 2 hands. Jahil's mood was the result of a grudge making his anger boil over. Taking over Footman might have had an effect, that was unclear, but either way, his heart was seething with a rage like a hurricane. That was why he was so violently dismissive of Luminous. Being denied the chance to take a swipe at her set him off so much, even he thought it a bit odd, but the next moment. "Won't you listen to me?" Feldway said quietly. It didn't sound all that intimidating, in fact, he was speaking with a perfectly normal tone. But with the aura that reigned supreme in the room, everybody, even Dino, was on the edge of their seats. "No, I'm sorry." Regaining his composure, Jahil immediately apologized. A wise decision on his part. "Feldway," Zorario said, "bear in mind that your aura is like poison to those not accustomed to it. You are in your true form now, nothing at all like you used to be." He, too, was smart to step up and defend Jahil, and with that, the situation was resolved. So they were back where they started. Feldway had narrowed his objectives down to 3 strategic goals. Steal the ultimate skill Sariel, Lord of Hope, from the hero Chronoa. Eliminate the hero Masayuki, a potential danger to their plans, and strip him of the ultimate skill Uriel, Lord of Vows. Last and most important, capture the draconic factors of Veldora. Now he thought it was time to reconsider these goals. The first question to tackle was the gathering of these skills. After inheriting Michael's powers, Feldway was able to detect and perceive angelic-type ultimate skills, but the collection of those angelic skills was Michael's personal mission, not Feldway's. As Michael himself was a conscious will housed inside a skill, he felt he could reach an all-powerful state by consolidating all the other skills into a single whole. This, the theory went, would allow him to become an omniscient, omnipotent creator. Although this logic seemed to make sense on the surface, Feldway was skeptical. For one, Veldinava was neither omniscient nor omnipotent. He himself said he had renounced those abilities, and there was no room to doubt those words. How wonderful it would be, Feldway thought, if that weren't true. If it were, he wouldn't have lost his power and gotten killed by mere humans. Of course, it was Veldinava himself who gave humans their desires. The subsequent cause and effect relationships led to his doom, in a way, a self-inflicted wound. Thanks to that, Feldway had no doubt Veldinava was a less than all-powerful being. As a result, he didn't see much point in collecting the angelic skills he was still missing. Besides, even if he could find them all, it'd mean nothing if he didn't have the right receptacles for them. Feldway and Michael had planned to manifest Veldinava by using the best possible body in the lineage of the first hero as a vessel. That plan was a total failure, Michael was defeated, and that body was gone. Those facts were set in stone, and that suggested to Feldway that targeting Masayuki was no longer such a high priority. Emperor Masayuki, eh? I hate having to lose to him, but victory or defeat is all about the luck of the moment anyway. It's not worth losing sight of the bigger picture. That was Feldway's decision. If Sarario and the others targeted Masayuki, who bore the power of Ludora, the true hero, in his hands, they'd quickly find themselves in over their heads. Vielgrind was still around, too. Any half-hearted effort would be met with swift vengeance. The only choice was for Feldway or Velzard to aim for Masayuki, or to ask Xeranus for the favor, but as Feldway saw it, they didn't have that much to gain from a victory anyway. Now Feldway was quickly narrowing down his goals. If he was going to leave Masayuki alone, that suggested there was little point to defeating Chronoa, his fellow hero. They might kill her before everything was through, but they didn't need to go out of their way to do it now. There was no need to assign valuable forces to the job when they could just wait for her to come at them instead. Now I wonder if all hope has been lost after all. Feldway's thoughts began to come together as he tried to shake off those fears. So? What's our plan? Jahil impatiently piped up at just the right moment. All we will go after are Veldora's factors. But we need to act so nobody knows who we're really aiming for. With that declaration, Feldway proposed a new strategy, and then, once everyone left, he began muttering to himself, "Now then, will Velzad achieve her goals for me?" That true dragon held the key to victory in this battle. Feldway thought so, at least. Her love is the real thing, I know. And if it is, the final outcome is beyond doubt. He smiled coldly at the thought of her beauty, thoroughly convinced of this eventuality. At the capital of the Holy Empire of Lubelius, where Shion and a Dalman had been sent, I was sitting on a sofa, relaxing. Next to me, Shion was defiantly demanding another cup of tea. Luminous's servants answered the request, and Shion accepted their service like she deserved every bit of it, eating a bowl of chazuk right there on the table. Nothing made her nervous, did it? And hang on a minute. Wasn't I supposed to be superior to her on the org chart? This difference in treatment's a little weird, isn't it? Why was I, the king, sitting there twiddling my thumbs while my, alleged, secretary Shion acted like she owned the place? I guess thinking about it would make me a petty loser, wouldn't it? Oh well. These snacks are delicious, Sir Rimuru, Shion said, offering the plate to me. I've tested them for poison for you, so please dig in. I popped one of the snacks into my mouth without thinking. The idea of someone as terrible in the kitchen as Shion tasting anything for poison was kind of a joke, but whatever. Poison didn't work on me in the first place, so I didn't really need that testing anyway. And yeah, these were good. Shion had a disastrous hand in the kitchen, but her palate wasn't so bad. But that just made this even more ridiculous. It suggested she didn't even bother tasting anything she cooked before foisting it on us. Her newfound skills had improved the taste of her food to perfection, but the look and the texture of her stuff were still garbage. What do you think? Do you like it? Yeah, I do. It's light, not too sweet, and I like how it comes apart in my mouth. It kind of reminded me of a financier, those little rectangular almond cakes you see in French bakeries. It had a slight fragrance to it that served as a nice accent, and overall, it was seriously tasty. Shion, hearing my praise, beamed at me. Wonderful. I had a lot of confidence about this recipe, Sir Rimuru, but I'm glad you liked it. I froze and looked at Shion. There she was, smiling as usual. I looked back at the baked treat in my hand, then at Shion again. Are you saying? Yes. I made those. Dude, you're kidding. It was a truly unbelievable statement, but I guess it was fact. It had been a very long time since I last saw Shion look that smug, but I couldn't blame her for acting so proud. Shion, that Shion, had finally figured out how to make food look and feel delicious, not just taste that way. Plus, did you use your inner skills to shape the taste and texture, or what? No, I made it with my own hands. Clearly, she was showing tremendous progress. I guess a change in environment really can lead to great strides. Her cooking had never improved, no matter how many times Shuna and Benimaru tried to steer her in the right direction, but after her little study abroad trip, something had awakened inside her. What triggered this, though? As soon as the question occurred to me, I heard a voice answering it. It's been a lot of hard work. Luminous blurted that out as she stepped into the reception room. Sorry to keep you, she added. I rose to greet her, but she just plopped down on her own seat, not bothering with formality. What is the matter with her anyway? She continued unprompted. She comes in here brimming with confidence about all the great dishes she can make, and then she comes up with all these unconventional-looking things that barely seem like food. She was using strong words to describe it. Her use of the term unconventional even gave me pause. And that's not all. Luminous went on. The texture of her work couldn't possibly be worse, but it all tastes so good, I don't even know what to think. Some are even trying to reproduce her dishes for fun. I've had to personally step in. Just think about the negative impact this might have on our food culture here. She must have been bottling up her anger for a while. I couldn't say much back to her apart from the occasional grunt. Well, I stammered, I'm glad you managed to correct Xion, though. All of us had long since given up on it, so great job. I tried to downplay my role in this. Luminous just stared back at me. Even Xion was giving me a look, cheeks puffed out in protest. I pretended not to notice as I awaited Luminous's answer. I can only imagine how much you and your associates have coddled Xion, but that is none of my business, she said. I intended to leave her be at first, but once she began to cause real damage, I could no longer remain silent. So I told her. Oh, coddling wasn't the way I would put it, but I suppose I couldn't blame people on the outside for seeing it that way. Shuna was one thing, but neither me nor Benimaru could cook at all, so we were in no position to take a really strong stance against Xion. It's pretty rude, after all, to go up to someone and whine to their face about stuff you can't even do. So I was hoping Shuna and Chef Goguchi would give her a talking to sooner or later, but Shuna was way too kind and gave up much too soon on Xion. Goguchi, meanwhile, wasn't nearly pushy enough for Xion's mind to be moved. So there we were, after all this time. Her food tasted better anyway, and it wasn't exacting a death toll anymore. That was how I thought about it, but maybe that was just me trying to escape reality. I had a long life ahead of me as a slime, so I really should have tried my own hand at cooking, if only to develop more of a kitchen kinship with Xion. Maybe then we could have found ways for her to improve, and this whole problem would have been solved sooner. This was really my and Benimaru's fault for turning away from what we didn't like doing. I was reflecting on that as Luminous finally continued. I told her that before she served anything to our guests, she needed to taste it first. Who knows, after all, whether someone laced it with poison. Oh. I see. Hence Xion bringing that topic up earlier. It wasn't that Xion's palate was a train wreck. She was just more than ever tasted her own stuff type of bad cook. Once she got in the habit, the problems with her cuisine would become much more obvious to her. I gotta hand it to ya, Luminous. You're a brilliant woman. I thanked her from the bottom of my heart. Luminous replied with a humph. As she turned away from me, her cheeks a little red with embarrassment. These improvements to Xion's kitchen efforts made for some unexpectedly good news, but they had nothing to do with why I was there. Ramirez reported to me that Milim and Xeranus the Insect Lord were deadlocked in combat. At the same time, Lubelius, the heart of the territory Luminous ruled over, was reportedly being attacked from the sky by angelic forces. Since Gobda and his team had been sent over to Milim as reinforcements, it seemed safe to assume things would be okay there for the time being. Milim was around, too, so unless something really crazy happened, things should work out. On the other hand, we had sent people like Xion and Adalman to support Luminous, and I can't say I had zero concerns about the strength of our army. The Crusaders, the main fighting force in Lubelius, had been deployed to the Kingdom of Inglesia, with their leader Hinata guiding them. Lubelius also had the Bloody Knights, a group composed of vampires numbering just under 400. They were quality fighters, each of them was over A in rank. A handful of the overcomers among them could be equivalent to the low end of Demon Lord seeds. Even so, though, when I heard Jahil was on the scene, I saw fit to take further action. So I left the cleanup effort in Inglesia to Hinata and Masayaki, and zoomed over in a great hurry. Despite my concern, though, there was no sign of battle at all, and instead of a war room update, I was sampling Xion's baking as I waited for Luminous to show up. I only had to wait around 10 minutes at most, though. I was so surprised about Xion's progress that we wound up talking for even longer about her. Now that everyone was relaxed, it was time to attend to business. So how did your battle with the angels go? I asked Luminous. They have withdrawn, and the damage is not very great. I don't think attacking here was part of their plan in the first place. Luminous gave me a detailed account. What she told me was that the attack was really nothing more than Jahil getting out of control, or maybe just harassing her. He and I have some history, you know, she said. We've never exactly gotten along well. She didn't elaborate when I asked, but when I told her Sylvia had given me part of the story, she went ahead and told the rest, a slightly disgusted look on her face. First off, there was someone in Luminous's life who was kind of like her father. He was the demigod Twilight Valentine, the king of the twilight, the kind of figure who showed up in myths and such. This demigod apparently created a lot of different intelligent life forms, and the founding figures of several of these species came to be known as the disciples of the demigod. The first of these disciples was Jahil and the second was Luminous, just like Sylvia told me. Each of these disciples established their own country. In Sylvia's case, she merely served a support role to the High Elves, but in the end, her daughter Ellie, the Emperor Elmesia, united the elves and established the sorceress dynasty of Thalion. Luminous and Sylvia, by the way, were still close. This wasn't through Ellie at all, Luminous just happened to know a lot about her. As a rule, Luminous said, I thought it best not to personally meddle with Thalion. I did help out in the beginning, however. Thalion was founded over 2,000 years ago, so I didn't know if Luminous was telling me the truth. But as long-lived as their species was, Luminous and Sylvia were kind of like walking dictionaries on their races, and I saw no reason why they'd lie to me. Convinced this was true, I continued listening to the story. Out of the original disciples of the demigod, only Luminous and Sylvia were still alive, or at least the others had fallen out of contact. King Garzel's ancestor, the founder of the High Dwarves, had reportedly died, and the leaders of the Enki and Siren races, the fire and water-based species, respectively, had also likely lived out their lifespans. The High Elves, being closest to the elementals, were always going to outlive them. Speaking of long-lived races, there were also the High Humans. This species was created solely by reversing the elemental attributes of the demigod himself. I'm not fond to admit it, but I am a sort of copy of the demigod, said Luminous. This makes me technically not a vampire at all, but a high blood. I was created from the blood of the demigod, you see, and Jahil from a culture of the demigod's body. I don't think he inherited the power to absorb force from others the way I can, but he was fairly close to immortal, too. The demigod didn't need to eat, instead, he survived by seizing the life force of other people. With no particular weaknesses to speak of, he was the living embodiment of immortality. Thus the demigod created two species by duplicating his own traits, the High Humans who lived by day, and the vampires who ruled the night. Living by day here is a metaphor. Think of it this way, plants gain energy through photosynthesis, animals consume them in order to sustain life. Predators prey upon those animals to accumulate more energy, and microorganisms feast upon their corpses to nourish the earth. In this scenario, it was the High Humans who stood at the top of the food chain. They were a full part of this chain, and thus they had finite lifespans, and Jahil was no exception. The average lifespan of a normal urban dweller in this world was around 70 years old, and that was without any magic-based extensions. Medicine wasn't too well developed at all, but despite that, humans actually lived for a decently long time around here. Those in rural areas or adjacent to monster-laden forests had a shorter average life expectancy, and I should also add this average didn't count deaths caused by natural and man-made disasters. High humans, meanwhile, could live between several centuries and a whole millennium, about the same as elves. Their physical strength seemed to be on another level from modern humans, too, and they had high magical resistance, so they could take them in and harness them for spells. But despite these skills, they were not immortal, there was no escaping their ultimate fate. So in response, Jahil devised a method to indefinitely extend his own life. It was called the secret art of spiritualization. His reasoning, I suppose, was that if you could not maintain the three elements making up a physical body, the material body, the spiritual body, and the astral body, at the same time, maybe it could be enough only to pass on the minimum amount needed to maintain your sense of self. In other words, Jahil succeeded in transforming his material body into a spiritual body. That way, he'd only need to keep his mental and astral bodies protected. That meant Jahil was voluntarily reborn as a spiritual life form. The mysterious art of reincarnation that Ghidorah developed was a way to reincarnate one's soul while it was still protected by its astral body. If it sounds risky, that's because it was. The physical body that resulted, though, belonged completely to that soul, and all its experiences and knowledge were passed along as well. Meanwhile, the secret art of possession that Rosen invented simply transplanted the spiritual and astral body into someone else's physical body, without passing on any of the skills attached. It was much safer, but since things like magic force are dependent on the physical body, you might wind up becoming weaker in your new incarnation. By contrast, Jahil's secret art of spiritualization was a perfect, surefire method of reincarnation. Since Jahil himself was now a spiritual life form, he was able to safely and surely inherit all the knowledge, experience, and skills he had gained in life. It required preparing a body to serve as his new vessel, Luminous bitterly said, but he could procure one from any number of his blood relatives. That was the way Jahil solved the problem of his finite lifespan. Okay, then. If he was a spiritual life form, his near immortality made sense. That also explained why he was able to take over Footman's body so easily. Of course, his arrogance caused him to make one serious mistake. As Luminous put it, while Jahil was absorbed in his spiritualization research, his staff, whom he left in charge of government politics, began competing with each other for supremacy. Over time, it divided up the country, and once he mistakenly summoned Guy, the most uncontrollable of demons, his downfall was complete. He resented me, after all, for destroying the demigod. He was always hostile toward me. I had assumed he had died on me long ago. Oh, what a happy thought that was. But I didn't think he'd be stubbornly surviving until now,